Okay, let's unpack this. When you hear the name Rosa Parks, chances are you immediately picture that single, powerful moment on the bus, December 1st, 1955.
It's absolutely iconic, yeah, etched into history. But the source material we're diving into today, these excerpts from Rosa Parks, Architect of Resistance, they offer, well, a much richer, much deeper picture.
Right, and what's fascinating here is how this source fundamentally shifts the focus. It shows that the woman on the bus wasn't just, someone having a difficult day.
Not at all. She was a person who was built, prepared, shaped by decades of struggle, of really dangerous work, and these profound personal partnerships.
Exactly. So our mission in this deep dive is really to explore that essential background, particularly her marriage to Raymond Parks and her extensive, often unseen civil rights work long before 1955.
We want to understand how that journey really forged the leader she became.
You might think you know the story, but this deep dive is all about that crucial groundwork you don't often hear about. The relationships that sustained her, the dangerous risks she was taking behind the scenes.
The hard-won lessons learned, all the things that made that defining moment on the bus not just possible, but maybe, almost an inevitable outcome of her life's path.
So let's start right there, at the beginning of that crucial preparation period, with someone who is absolutely central, but is often, kind of a footnote, Raymond Parks.
Yes, Raymond. Rosa met him back in 1932, right in the thick of the Great Depression.
And the source highlights his significance immediately. He was about 10 years older, a barber here in Montgomery.
Right. And his shop wasn't just, for haircuts. It was this vital gathering spot, a kind of nerve center for the Black community where people could talk openly, strategize, share information.
He had this quiet strength, the source says, but also a political savvy, a sophistication that really impressed Rosa.
And this is a detail that really stands out in the source. Raymond had a light complexion. He could have, easily passed for white.
Which would have meant navigating Jim Crow very differently.
Right.
Fewer direct confrontations, maybe escaping some of the worst restrictions.
Absolutely. But he chose not to. He made a deliberate, conscious decision to identify as Black and dedicate himself to fighting for his people.
And that moral courage, that unwavering stance, the source tells us, that was incredibly attractive to Rosa.
And it wasn't just a philosophical choice, right? It showed up in extremely dangerous action. Raymond was already deeply embedded in the struggle.
Specifically working on the defense of the Scottsboro Boys case.
Yes, which was this massive, high-stakes, incredibly fraught legal battle that was consuming the community's attention at the time.
So this wasn't just abstract talk for Rosa. He'd come home and discuss the Scottsboro case with her, the, intense secret meetings, the difficulties of fundraising for the legal defense.
The complex legal strategies they were trying. This was her direct introduction to the mechanics of organized resistance. Not as an idea, but through the lived, dangerous experience of her husband.
And the danger was constant. The source describes Raymond often carrying a gun when he went to meetings. For Scottsboro, other defense work.
Knowing he was a potential target, just think about Rosa waiting at home, knowing the physical risks he was taking simply to attend a meeting.
It must have been terrifying. But the source suggests attending some of those meetings with Raymond, seeing that world firsthand, that's what drew her deeper in.
She started to grasp the complex web, the forces keeping segregation locked in place. And Raymond, seeing her intelligence, her commitment, he actively encouraged her. He saw her potential for leadership.
So their marriage, December 18th, 1932, it was simple, reflecting the hard times.
But the source really frames it as the formation of this powerful partnership, one fundamentally committed to the fight for civil rights right from the very start.
And building on that partnership, one of Raymond's immediate priorities right after they married was something pretty revolutionary for the time.
Yeah, he strongly encouraged Rosa to complete her high school education. This was in 1933.
It seems like such a basic thing to us now, maybe, but the source really emphasizes how significant this was. She had left school years before to care for family.
Her grandmother, yeah. And in the South, in the early 1930s, fewer than 10% of African Americans had high school diplomas. For Black women, that number was even lower. It was a real rarity.
And Raymond actively supported this. The source says he worked extra hours at his barbershop, making sacrifices so she could focus on studying.
The source points out that this decision itself for a Black woman to pursue formal education so diligently, it was seen as inherently defiant. threatening to the established racial order.
Because educated black women challenged those stereotypes, right?
Right.
They demanded respect in a system built to deny them both.
Exactly. Earning that diploma was an act of resistance in itself.
So she goes back to school, she's 20 years old, and she excels, particularly in history, literature. Her teachers recognized her abilities.
And getting that diploma in 1933, it wasn't just a personal win. The source actually describes it as acquiring a weapon in the fight for equality.
It positioned her as one of the most educated black women in Montgomery, gave her skills, credibility, invaluable stuff for the movement later on.
So this decade of preparation alongside Raymond, finishing her education, it all leads up to her formal entry into the organized civil rights structure. In 1943, she joins the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP.
But the source makes it really clear. She wasn't some novice just joining a club. She was someone prepared by years of observation, discussion, learning with Raymond.
Right, and the Montgomery NAACP in 1943, well, it wasn't the powerhouse it would later become famous for.
No, the source describes it as small, constantly under threat, surveillance. Meetings were held in secret.
Members risked everything. Their jobs, their safety, their lives, really, just by being involved. Joining then was a serious act of courage.
The chapter was led by E.D. Nixon at the time, a Pullman porter, so he had that broader national perspective from traveling.
And Nixon quickly recognized Rosa's qualities, her quiet strength, her intelligence, her dedication.
She was elected secretary, and the source really highlights that this role, it was far more than just clerical work.
Oh, absolutely. It demanded meticulous precision, absolute discretion. I mean, the work was sensitive, it was dangerous, and a deep, intuitive understanding of the community.
And the injustices they faced every single day. Keeping accurate records, especially of racial violence, discrimination, that was vital for any hope of legal challenges.
And this is where her work becomes incredibly hands-on and, frankly, dangerous. The source identifies her as the chapter's primary investigator for racial violence and discrimination.
So when incidents happened, she was the one going out, interviewing victims, often in really traumatic situations, meticulously documenting attacks, intimidation, systemic abuse.
Then working with lawyers, trying to build cases. It must have been emotionally devastating work, putting her face to face with the absolute worst realities of Jim Crow.
The source details one particularly harrowing case. She investigated the gang rape of Recy Taylor in 1944.
Recy Taylor, a young black woman attacked by 6 white men in Abbeville, Alabama. Rosa traveled there herself to investigate, documented the horrifying attack and the immediate, blatant cover-up by local law enforcement who just refused to prosecute.
And predictably, no convictions ever came from it. The system was designed to protect white perpetrators, silence black victims, especially women.
Exactly. But the source emphasizes the impact of Rosa's work on the Recy Taylor case. Her investigation brought national attention to this systemic sexual violence targeting black women.
It profoundly shaped her understanding, didn't it, of those unique intersecting oppressions, racism, and sexism that black women face daily.
Yes, and it cemented her role as this tireless advocate, a voice for the most vulnerable members of the community.
Beyond investigating violence, her activism also involved that intensely dangerous and frustrating work of voter registration back in the 1940s.
Oh, it's easy to forget today just how difficult and risky that was. You had the 15th Amendment, sure, technically guaranteeing the vote.
But southern states used every trick in the book. Crippling poll taxes, complex, arbitrary literacy tests.
Grandfather clauses that just happened to exempt white voters, and just overt violence and intimidation to keep black citizens off the rolls.
And working alongside E.D. Nixon, Rosa was actively organizing voter drives. She'd actually accompany potential voters to the courthouse.
Standing with them in that intimidating environment, helping them prepare for those deliberately confusing tests, just providing moral support when officials were doing everything to turn them away.
And the source doesn't sugarcoat the frustration. Most attempts just failed.
Rosa herself tried multiple times before she finally managed to pass. Facing harassment, being asked impossible, catch-22 questions designed solely to deny her the right to vote.
But they understood, deeply, why this work was absolutely non-negotiable.
Yeah. Without the vote, without political power, there was no leverage to elect officials who would address their concerns or dismantle segregation through law. It was slow, dangerous, frustrating work, but essential for any long-term change.
Let's circle back for just a moment to the Scottsboro Boys case. We mentioned Raymond's involvement earlier.
Right, but the source really emphasizes that participating in the fight around that specific case that was maybe the most formative experience, the one that transformed Rosa from, say, an observer learning from her husband into a fully committed, independent activist in her own right.
It began so tragically. March 25, 1931. 9 young black men, mostly teenagers, 13 to 19 years old.
Falsely accused of raping 2 white women after a fight broke out on a freight train.
And the injustice was staggering from the get-go. Denied adequate legal help, tried by all-white juries in these rushed proceedings.
The source describes the atmosphere as being like lynch mobs. 8 of the 9 immediately sentenced to death, based on flimsy evidence, coerced testimony. Just awful.
And when the mainstream NAACP initially hesitated, it was a politically volatile case. Other groups stepped in.
Right, the International Labor Defense, the Communist Party, they organized the defense. And Raymond's deep personal involvement came from his sense of fundamental justice. He saw it as this clear test. Could the American legal system ever be fair to black people?
He attended meetings, tirelessly raised funds, worked with the lawyers, facing extraordinary danger doing it. Supporters were routinely threatened, attacked.
And the case became intensely personal for Rosa as she learned the details. She understood these weren't criminals. Their crime, as the source puts it, was simply being black in the wrong place, wrong time.
She noted their ages, too. Some younger than her. Children, like 13-year-old Eugene Williams, facing the death penalty.
And the legal battle just dragged on for years. Multiple trials, appeals, retrials. Rosa watched the legal system seem to twist itself into knots to avoid admitting its initial horrific mistake.
Prosecutors relentlessly pursuing convictions, even after one of the main accusers recanted her testimony.
It was a brutal education in the entrenched nature of systemic injustice. And the source notes, it also created divisions within the civil rights community over strategy, leadership.
So, drawing from that long, grueling fight like Scottsboro, plus her investigations, her voter registration work, what were the crucial lessons Rosa learned during the 30s and 40s, according to the source?
Well, first, she saw the American legal system's capacity for just breathtaking injustice towards black Americans, how it could be utterly corrupted by racial prejudice.
But crucially, she also learned that sustained pressure, persistent legal challenges, widespread public attention that could force the system to bend, however slowly.
Right. She learned effective work needed both things. Dedicated local organizing, like that small Montgomery NAACP chapter.
And national, even international attention.
Yeah.
The Scottsboro Boys were saved from execution, partly because their case gained worldwide prominence.
She also saw the immense, often overlooked power of ordinary people. The Scottsboro defendants, they weren't leaders, just teenagers caught in a nightmare.
But their plight rallied millions globally, forced a national conversation about justice.
And finally, she learned the absolute vital importance of persistence. Just sticking with it, even in the face of crushing setbacks.
The Scottsboro defense lasted years, didn't result in, complete victory for everyone involved.
No, but it proved the system, however rigged, could be challenged and changed through relentless effort.
The source actually describes this entire period, these 2 decades leading up to 55, as her graduate education in activism.
That's a great way to put it. Think about the skills she honed. Investigating cases, gathering evidence meticulously, working discreetly, effectively with lawyers with different parts of the community.
Maintaining hope and trust among victims and activists, handling sensitive, dangerous missions.
It helped her develop this personal philosophy, didn't it? Combining that deep sense of dignity, self-respect, quiet courage from her grandparents.
With the strategic thinking, the organizational skills, the practical wisdom she gained from the NAACP.
The source portrays her developing this philosophy that required, moral clarity about right and wrong, practical wisdom in navigating a dangerous world, immense individual courage, and the ability to foster and rely on collective action.
So by the early 1950s, the source makes clear she was far from a novice, experienced, respected within her circle.
And she understood the struggle was a marathon, not a sprint. It required unwavering commitment over the long haul.
Which brings us back full circle to that specific moment, December 1st, 1955. The source material, Rosa Parks, architect of resistance. It leaves no doubt whatsoever. The woman on that bus was not acting on impulse.
Not at all. Not just a spontaneous decision born of exhaustion after a long day.
She was drawing on the cumulative weight of those 2 decades of experience, built on a lifetime of preparation starting way back.
Her quiet refusal that day, it wasn't a beginning. The source presents it as the deliberate, conscious culmination of that long, hard journey.
Rooted in her family's values, strengthened by her partnership with Raymond, informed by her dangerous foundational work with the NAACP investigating violence, organizing voter registration.
shaped by the profound, difficult lessons from cases like the Scottsboro Boys.
She wasn't just a tired seamstress. She was a seasoned activist who understood the system she was challenging intimately, and she understood the community she represented.
She was ready.
Yeah.
Ready because she'd been preparing for 20 years.
So just to quickly recap this deep dive into the source material, we've highlighted the indispensable role of Raymond Parks, that partnership, the revolutionary significance of her education back then,
The dangerous foundational work with the NAACP investigator, organizer, and those profound character-shaping lessons from cases like Scottsboro.
This source powerfully reinforces the idea that the famous moment in 1955, it was built upon this deep, often unseen foundation of experience, courage, strategic learning, unwavering commitment.
It shows she really was an architect of resistance, like the title says, drafting blueprints, laying groundwork for decades before the world saw her stand by, staying seated.
So here's a thought for you to consider, drawing purely from the insights in this source. Think about how many seemingly spontaneous, pivotal moments in history, the ones that capture the world's attention, might actually be just the visible peak.
The tip of the iceberg. Underneath are years, maybe decades of unseen preparation, dangerous, thankless groundwork, and that unwavering commitment by ordinary people working together against injustice.
What does that perspective shift tell you about the true nature of how significant social change really happens?